بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
You are not like other carbon-based life forms. You put the value of all life above your own.
Welcome to the third episode of the second season, Silent Messages, of the fourth podcast. I'm Ali Wazir,
I am Ibrahim Ali.
And I'm Talha Muhammad.
and you can help us grow by giving us a follow on Instagram at thefourth.productions and Twitter at thefourth_prod, P-R-O-D. Back to the show. So let's continue from where we left off last week.
Last week we talked about empathy through the lens of culture. Specifically, we talked about empathizing through social media and not being desensitized by it. This week we're going to talk about empathy through the lens of wellness, specifically mental wellness, and how to empathize with different mental health conditions.
So according to the World Health Organization, WHO, 1 in 4 people in the world will be diagnosed or affected by a mental or neurological disorder at some point in their lives. Now, right now, we have about 450 million people that currently suffer from such conditions. It's clear that mental wellness impacts many more people than we have conversations about it. So, how do we even begin understanding and empathizing with people who struggle with mental wellness?
So I think, you said 450 million people, and that's like only the people who've been diagnosed with it. But, imagine the amount of people that haven't been diagnosed with it, that are undiagnosed, and they're just living with this condition. The number must be much higher.
So mental wellness is clearly something that a lot of people struggle with. This is not a podcast about where we talk about, maybe how to get through it. You should definitely go to a doctor if you struggle with some mental illness or,
Maybe.
think you do. Well, we just want to talk about how to empathize with people who struggle with these things every day, especially from the point of view of 3 people who are, I think, mentally pretty healthy.
Sure.
I'll try. I think one of the biggest demographics that's affected by mental health issues in more recent years is actually the youth. Whether you see younger children through tragic events in their life, or just individuals in high school and college going through the stressors of school. A lot of times you see higher suicide rates within high schools and colleges that you never used to see a few generations back. I know personally, when I was going through high school, there were about 3 suicides during my 4 years in high school, and they were mainly due to social and educational stressors. But as Ibrahim and Talha spoke before, we want to learn how we can empathize with these individuals.
Sure, so let me throw out a few stats for you guys. Approximately 1,100 college students commit suicide each year in the U.S. That's the second highest leading cause of death among college students.
Dang, what's number 1? You guys know?
I don't know. If I had to guess, I'd say
Probably drunk driving.
drunk
Yeah.
overdoses.
Yeah, or
or car crashes. I don't know.
Yeah. So, to kind of tie it back to, episode 1, we talked about how the ruling class affects our, our daily lives. And I think that...
I really want to see where this is going, man.
Yeah, we'll see. You see, I got this all, planned out.
Okay.
So, the way the ruling class... I think that the ruling class is directly affecting our mental health, especially through the demographic of college-age students, because of some of the reasons that could be affecting our mental health are, rising tuition, student loans, lower wages, and higher tuition, right? So, the stress of, trying to pass classes, trying to make tuition, trying to pay it, and then the stress of having to deal with that debt for the rest of your life may be a leading cause of this depression and anxiety. And also, we have to look at the reason why we have these conditions to begin with. And I think it's that the people who are in positions of power want to keep that power and keep that money to themselves. And they've implemented these systems where we have to, borrow large amounts of money and, worry about passing classes and making those payments for the rest of our lives. Thus, being depressed, and being anxious. And I think that's one of the reasons why mental health is such a problem, and especially in the college-aged community or demographic, I guess.
Well, that's really profound. I didn't.
Yeah, I never thought of it that way, man.
That's a good.
I never necessarily alluded mental health to loans, simply because I always thought like loan money. Yeah, you know it's stressful, but I never necessarily. I mean, personally, I never thought of it as something that would become so. I never thought of loan money as something that would take over someone's life to the point where they would want to end their life, per se.
Yeah, I mean, I guess coming from more privileged backgrounds, we don't really think about that too often, but it is for sure a reality. I remember, I think I mentioned this sometime in like season 1 as well. Suicide rates in India have gone up because land over there is getting more expensive and people are getting bought off their land. So a lot of farmers who like lose their lands and then don't have any money to pay back their debts and so on, they just commit suicide. Like, so it is a real problem that affects mental health for sure. There is definitely a correlation between levels of debt and your mental wellness. So I think that's important to always keep in mind when we encounter people who aren't doing so well with their mental wellness. It often has to do with material circumstances as well.
So I think, I mean, when we look at people who should be having empathy for this group of individuals, it's primarily like the older generations, right? And they usually, have you guys ever heard the saying, go to college, get a job, like that's like the usual
American dream.
Dream. And people don't realize that, when people drop out, is because they can't afford to pay for college, or somebody got sick in their family and they have to make payments for that, and they cannot continue to do both things, and then they're stuck with like a minimum wage job for like 10-20 years of their life. And what do these guys say? This older generation of people, like the boomer generation, they say, oh yeah, these guys are lazy, and I feel like there's a big lack of empathy over there because they don't realize the circumstances that generation had to go through.
Yeah, that's for sure. I'm going to switch this around for a second. So we're talking about empathizing with people by looking at their material circumstances, but we have to also acknowledge that that's not a qualifier for mental wellness issues, right? Like sometimes people who do come from more privileged backgrounds also struggle with mental health, and then the response that they often get is that, why are you depressed, man? Your life is amazing. You have like a car. You have... you don't have to worry about student loans or anything.
I think one thing that we could point out is the lack of access to mental health care for people who are less privileged than others. I think that there's been a deliberate effort to suppress mental health care from marginalized communities and people of less means. Yeah, so I think that the lack of access to mental health care for especially marginalized communities in our society is a big problem that contributes to a lot of mental health problems.
Not only that, Ibrahim, you also have to look at within higher socioeconomic classes, the topic of mental health almost becomes taboo. For example, whether it's a specific demographic, a specific culture or race, we see within higher socioeconomic classes that they don't necessarily want to put their children it's very difficult to put your own child in a psych institution or a mental health or a rehab institution simply because of the stigma surrounding it.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately, I think that's one of the issues. Before we can even begin empathizing with individuals that have mental health issues, you have to look at the stigma and how we can possibly get rid of it or maybe even decrease it in its prevalence.
Yeah, that's totally right. Definitely a big part of not empathizing with people with mental health issues is the stigma associated with it, and that's why empathy is so important when you see those kind of people. If someone tells you that, if someone confides in you that they're currently in like a psych ward, right? I don't know how these things work too well, but maybe undergoing rehabilitation.
Perhaps an individual just came out of rehab. Like the first thought that comes through someone's mind is like, "Oh crap!" Unfortunately, that's what it is, right?
I gotta stay away from.
I gotta dip. I'm gonna head out. Like straight up, that's what it is. No, I'm not. That's unfortunately the mentality, and I think
you're right.
That stems from we fear what we do not know. That stems from the lack of knowledge about these institutions and about the mental health issues that are prevalent
in our society. Yeah, I mean, if we look at, especially, the non-white community, as, you pointed out, there is definitely a stigma that surrounds it, about mental health being like either it doesn't exist or the solutions to it are, completely weird, or like this, either it doesn't exist or, the solutions to it are a little, out there. Just make dua to Allah. You're not praying enough.
You're not praying enough, yeah.
And a lot of people don't realize that.
What do you have to be sad about?
Exactly,
yeah.
And a lot of people don't realize that mental health is can also be a physical thing, like a physical problem. And I know you guys are more knowledgeable than this about me, but there could be a chemical imbalance in the brain for like people who are depressed, or you guys can maybe elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, this all, like Ali was saying, this all stems from a lack of education about this. So depression is, like, especially medical depression, is not just that you're feeling sad, right? Like, people will say, "Oh, go for a walk, you'll feel better." That's not a cure to medical depression at all. What is a cure is, going to a psychiatrist about that, and that's what needs to be done. There's no, there shouldn't be any stigma about it. It shouldn't be seen as a negative. It shouldn't be seen as something that you have to like hide from your parents or your family. You should be able to just go and like speak to a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a therapist, and get either the medication that you need or whatever it might be. You need to better it. You're not going to better it by like, going to the gym, eating healthier foods, that kind of stuff. Although not helpful at all.
Although, yes, I do agree. That's not the solution to it. But I will advocate that having a healthier lifestyle will, have a positive effect on your mental health.
Of course, we should all strive for healthier lifestyles, and little things often do help, like the average person, I'd say. Like, being grateful for the things you have can lead to an increase in your quality of life, for sure.
And I think if you do go to like a therapist or, a mental health professional, they will recommend these things to do alongside,
Yeah, but if there's like a chemical imbalance, and that's something medical that
sure.
needs to be treated properly.
Like antidepressants and whatnot,
Yeah, there's like abnormal activity of like neural circuits, which is the case in major depression, for example. You are not necessarily going to see an instant, how do I say this? You're not going to see an instant change in behavior by telling an individual to, as you mentioned, take a walk or pray more, or, for example, prayer specifically, you have to have a sense of sincerity when you go into it, right? Like, just from a religious point of view, you have to have a sense of sincerity when you go into it. That's how you glean the rewards from the prayer, right? From a spiritual perspective. An individual that is having major depressive episodes, or they are having bouts of extreme sadness or anger, are they necessarily going to feel that sense of attachment to the prayer? Or as many individuals say, oh yeah, just pray, or in our community, just read Quran, or get more attached to God. Well, how can an individual do that without finding sincerity in those actions? There has to be a sense, of attachment to those. Otherwise, you're just doing ritual actions.
For sure.
So,
so that's the thing, right? Like, all wellness is kind of interconnected, for sure. But there's also a reason that we split it up. So spiritual wellness is a thing on its own.
Yeah.
Can it impact your mental wellness? Of course, I think a lot of studies indicate that having a spiritual aspect to your life improves your life and, the quality of your life. But does that mean that increasing your spiritual wellness or your physical wellness or your emotional wellness is the answer to bettering your mental wellness? No. These things can help, but they're like little side quests, right? The main thing is still the mental wellness that needs to be attacked head on, like directly.
Well, I mean, I'm gonna have to slight disagreement.
Okay. Let's hear it.
Just because just on a personal level, like, I feel as though, yes, the older generation, as you mentioned before, Ibrahim, boomer generation, these people, you have such an attachment, which is great. You have such an attachment to the religion and spirituality that when they see a mental health issue, it's like, okay, but you have an issue, or okay, son or daughter, you have an issue. with your spirituality and your connectedness to God, right? So all they say is, yo, we're not going to take you to a psych ward. We're not going to take you to a rehab center. We're going to take you to the masjid or to your place of worship, right? So you go see, for example, the father in the church or the imam in the masjid or whatever religious affiliation you have. Your parents take you there. You talk to the leader of your community, and your parents might do that 1 or 2 times. And then, they expect it.
Yeah, man, why aren't you fixed yet?
Yeah, I think that's an issue. Now, we see just from literally one generation gap to maybe individuals in their late 20s, early 30s now, you will see that when an individual in our community has a psychological issue or a mental health issue, the immediate response is no longer, okay, yeah, let's look at spirituality. That is almost completely gone. That's almost completely gone. Now it's, all right, let's go see a psychiatrist. Let's go see a mental health scholar or a mental health individual. Let's go get you prescribed on antidepressants, anxiety pills. And so all of that's great. It's just, you also have to look at the repercussions of taking pills, antidepressants, for example. You also have to take a look at the constant need for how long is that individual going to need going to rehab or going and seeing a psychiatrist.
So actually,
are you advocating for more balance in your life?
Whoa. Yeah, I am actually. No. And so, because here's the thing, is we went from one end of the spectrum to the other end of the spectrum.
Okay.
Like having no mental health awareness to now having just full mental health awareness and lack of spirituality.
Well, not just spirituality, but I think we can also say like physical health as well. Like for some people, they'll go to the other extreme and just focus on like taking pills and whatnot, but then they're like eating crap every day.
That's true.
And just like not working out. Like obviously,
So
all these things need to be taken together. Sorry, man, I keep cutting you off.
I think one good point that you brought up was that over dependence on pills, and I see currently a lot of famous people have been dying because of drug overdoses, and like
I think that's a different type of drugs. No,
it's antidepressant.
Okay.
Like Xanax, for example, is an antidepressant.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
Yeah, or like that's
anxiety, but yeah.
like that's like a very yeah. I mean you know it. Whatever.
Neuropharmacology.
Yeah. Yeah. So we
That
see
makes
like just this morning I saw that rapper Juice WRLD. I don't know if you guys know him. Yeah, he died because
R.I.P.
21.
R.I.P.
he died because of he had a seizure and he died, and I'm not sure I'm pretty sure that's probably caused by over dependence or like an overdose on.
Damn, I'm gonna just pull out MLV right now.
But there's like a common sentiment that these people, like especially people in fame, that like the under 27 club. You guys ever heard of that? Like they don't make it past 27 because like you have a lot of famous people that to cope with the stresses of being famous and the stresses of the anxiety that comes with that, they cope with unhealthy means like drinking I don't know what the word is, cough syrup, like
purple drink.
Yeah, the purple drink.
Why are you so familiar with
I didn't want to say that, but
I used to listen to a lot of Future, bro.
I think that's the correct term for it. Purple drink.
Purple drink. Scientifically speaking, it's called purple drink.
Yeah, that's the Latin name.
Yeah.
Purple drink.
Yeah, so they cope with substance abuse, and that's very common in marginalized communities, and we see like more and more common, like especially recently, people just dying left and right because of overdependence on drugs.
I mean, yeah, that's the opioid epidemic, right?
Yeah.
I think part of this though is like a feedback loop onto itself as well, especially in our communities, right? What happens is that there's like okay, so antidepressants are obviously a recent invention, right? Like chemically treating these kind of mental imbalances. So a lot of the pills that come out, like a lot of antidepressants that are available on the market today and that are prescribed often, for sure they have horrible side effects, right? Like they cause other hormonal imbalances. They mess with your mental health in other ways and probably are worse than the solutions they give. But it shouldn't turn us off from trying to find a chemical solution to these problems. I don't think so, right? And I don't know, maybe you guys have different perspectives, but I feel like we shouldn't stigmatize antidepressants because of this, and instead we should advocate for more research into this so that we can eventually develop pills that don't have these kind of horrible side effects while treating these chemical imbalances. Because
you bring up a very interesting tangent that I don't know if we should have the time to fully dive into, but do you think that pharmaceutical companies purposefully develop these drugs so that people get hooked to them or have a tendency to, that they're addictive in nature?
Oh yeah.
So that people keep spending money on these drugs and on these pills, on these syrups and whatnot, these cough syrups. And when people see that people are overdosing on drugs, again, to bring it back to empathy, they have that lack of empathy that's so prevalent because, what do they think? Oh yeah, look, it's just another drug addict that passed away, that overdosed. But they don't realize that there's underlying mental health issues and there's underlying,
treatment strategies.
And again, when people use these antidepressants, when they overdose on these drugs, it's not part of an overall. I'm not advocating for these drugs, or I'm not I don't know, that's the word. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but I'm not trying to say that antidepressants don't work. I'm just trying to say that they're part of an overall, mental health treatment plan, I guess you could say.
Well, Ibrahim,
for sure, man.
You
Sorry,
just
go ahead.
touched upon a very sensitive topic within the healthcare community. How do you go about balancing the business aspect of the pharmaceutical industry with the moral and ethical dilemmas facing the community? So as Talha mentioned before, you have the opioid epidemic, and I know that's a minor tangent, but the opioid epidemic in itself is also another issue. You have individuals that whether they're going through massive issues, physical issues with pain, you have a major problem when it comes to the price of opioids are so cheap versus taking an individual to physical therapy. So a physical therapy session might cost $100 every 2 weeks, but an opioid pill, you can get a little bottle for much cheaper.
Where would you get that?
So the issue with it is that opioids are addictive. We know that. There's a massive issue in America today. The same issue, I wouldn't necessarily the same issue in terms of addiction applies to. I wouldn't say the same issue applies to antidepressants. However, antidepressants like Zoloft and Prozac, you have issues like weight loss or weight gain, lack of appetite, sexual dysfunction as a side effect, either insomnia or sleeplessness, right? Or maybe even an increased amount of anxiety can stem, a reverse side effect can stem from these. So you have all these side effects. And does the pharmaceutical industry play a role? Yes. And it all comes back to empathizing with individuals. How much do we really care about human beings to get over these capitalistic humps and just gleaning money from individuals? So
for sure, man. I mean, I think you called it a tangent, but I don't think discussing the role of pharmaceutical companies in the opioid crisis, and then also just mental wellness in general, is a tangent at all, because they for sure are big pharmaceutical companies like Pfizer and Bayer. They have some of the most unethical practices probably in all the capitalist world, and they are definitely complicit in the opioid epidemic in the United States, because they would rather overprescribe these pills and have people buy a lot of them and then kill themselves rather than make them better, or not prescribe so many, or not kind of pressure doctors to prescribe them so easily. That's definitely all part of it, and this all goes into empathy as well. These people are struggling from some form of mental wellness, and the big corporations are just seeing them as a way to get money quickly before they die, I guess, right? And so we need to empathize with that fact that the corporations aren't looking out for them. So maybe we as fellow humans should.
That really does tie it back into what we talked about in episode 1, where the people who are truly profiting off these poor people that are suffering through these illnesses and whatnot, that these are the people that are responsible for all of this at the end of the day. So I think when we talk about like people who are in power, like the ruling elite, I think we should look at the people who are running the pharmaceutical industries, and how they're running their companies with a lack of empathy, and how that translates to how the general population, like the boomer generation, or even people who are more well off to do in our generation, to have a lack of empathy and empathizing with these individuals who have these mental health issues.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest issues is, yeah, we have a difference in how people perceive mental health within different demographics, but how can we in general empathize with these individuals, and how can we give our full support, and how can we learn more about it? Well, the first thing I think people have to do is obviously learn more about mental health issues.
Okay.
Because they're prevalent within our community. 1 in 4 people have them. 450 million individuals have been diagnosed with them. So why don't we take it upon ourselves to learn about them? Because 1 in 4, either yourself or an individual in your family is going to be dealing with mental health issues at one point in their life, right? So not only that, I think we have to expand our support beyond having just a mental health awareness day, or just beyond reaching, have you seen, like a lot of times on social media activism, where people are like, yeah, reach out to a friend in need. It's like, bruh, you can reach out to a friend in need, but I'm pretty sure the individuals that really need your help are not going to express that they need help. It's unfortunate, but that's what occurs.
Yeah, if you guys ever heard of the saying, look out for your strong friend, like the person who you least expect to have these issues may be dealing with them without your knowledge, or like without you knowing that they're going through it. So we have to have the correct emotional intelligence to be able to deal with these problems.
It's almost as if I've heard the phrase silent messages somewhere. Whoa.
So
you gotta look out for those silent messages from the people that you care about and love. Most people who are actually having some difficulty with this, they won't mention it. Yeah. Part of that is the stigma that's associated with it. Part of that is that they don't want to trouble you with it, because a lot of these people are like caring and they care about you, and they wouldn't want to trouble you with this. So you gotta keep your eyes open, your ears open for these silent messages that are coming.
I think that.
What do you guys actually think are some silent messages that we can look out for, based on, I know you guys have done some research for this episode.
Yeah, I definitely did some research for this episode.
Some of the silent messages I guess you have to look out for. If a friend...
Again, let's preface this by saying that by no means we're professionals.
We're not psychiatrists.
But you could say we're professional friends, right?
Yeah.
You're good. So if you need to hire us to show your parents you're not alone or something, we'll come to your party.
$20 an hour.
So one of the things you have to look out for specifically is if one of your friends, or if you're just noticing an individual, there's no harm in asking someone, "Are you okay?" And what's interesting is the immediate response. Literally, the immediate response from everyone is, "Yeah, I'm good, man. What's up?" I'm good. It's like immediately when someone asks, "Hey, man, are you okay?"
It's automatic. Yeah.
It's automatic. It's weird, but I think sitting down and actually having deep conversations with people is something that no longer occurs. Like everyone talks about superficial things, sports, life, for YouTube channels, movies, Netflix shows. We talk about the most superficial things. It's really interesting because it's really interesting when you start talking about deep topics with individuals. If you start talking about deep things with people, they start to unravel. It's like an onion, low key. Like people just like you start finding out about start finding out about people, things that you never would have. So I think that's something, like if you engage in deep conversations with individuals, it can be like with random strangers or people within your classes. So that's just from my personal experience. I know it sounds weird to have a deep conversation with a complete stranger. But
build those relationships.
Yeah, acquaintances. You know.
I think you bring up a really good point by saying that people talk about these, superficial things like, sports, movies, TV shows. Do you guys think that's a coping mechanism for people to not talk about, to not address these issues?
For some people, I mean, absolutely.
Because I know
it's much easier to talk about these things than it
or
is
like just not to think about the the overlying the main problem to begin with.
Oh man, this is a tangent, but that's why politics is even often perceived as a game, as a horse race nowadays. People don't want to think about the impacts of
their actions, their votes.
Of their policies and this, so they'll just they'll spin it as like a race that we don't really have much effect from, right? They'll choose a team and then like support them all the way through. Let's say, and I think definitely this is a coping mechanism.
So
it's easy to like go off these conversations though, like for me at least, I don't know, I talk with sports about people, talk about football, soccer, whatever, and then kind of when you're building a relationship with someone, so why do you like the sport so much? What got you into it? And I think that's always it always like Ali's saying, it's always
So why do you like the Broncos? It must be hard.
It's hard as a free yeah.
Bringing it back, you opening up these conversations is one thing. Being willing to talk to people about what's going on in their lives. I think also connecting. A lot of people don't realize that you might have a close friend group and everyone seems really tight knit, but there are individuals that may not have like even a close friend group. And like there are people like on the fringe of society that you might see them, like you might see that individual maybe a few times at school. You might see that person maybe once at your local place of worship or whatnot, or maybe once at the gym or whatnot, and you're like, yo, I haven't seen that dude in a while. Strike up a conversation with that individual. You never know how you might affect their lives. So
I think that's a great point. I mean, I'm not going to say that. We say that a lot. I think that's a great point. What's another way to say that? We say that a lot. I say a lot. You say a lot. Because I've been editing.
Cutting out.
I've been editing these, so I know the patterns for speech. And then you say, I think that's a great point.
Yeah. That's how I transition. Yeah.
Like we've said many times, we're obviously not professionals. So next week we will be talking with a professional.
So, gentlemen, I think we should hold off on next week's topic or next episode's topic until we get there. But for our listeners, I want to thank you all for tuning in to the Fourth Podcast. Again, be sure to give us a follow on Instagram at thefourth.productions and Twitter at thefourth_prod, PROD. And be sure to tune in again next week, where we'll be interviewing Mikhail Smith, who's written a whole book on emotional intelligence. As of now, we hope you have a great rest of your week.